The motivation here is about grabbing Venezuela's oil for American oil companies. You already see folks on Wall Street lining up. So let's just be real as to what is really behind this operation. I mean, Donald Trump said he was going to focus on the United States. We have people's health care costs going through the roof because they refused to extend the Affordable Care tax credits. Meanwhile, he bails out Argentina and wants to run Venezuela for the benefit of American oil companies.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's horrible. The worst you can get, tar. It's like tar. And to refine it, you need special plants. And these people...
As everybody should recognize, the United States of America, and as I spoke to some over there already, the Department of War, the Department of State, Department of Treasury, Commerce, our capabilities to maintain an order and stability in our hemisphere and specifically in our backyard and in the Gulf, those capabilities are unparalleled. What everybody saw on various videos with our Department of War and our law enforcement operations, unparalleled. Only the United States of America can do that. That is what peace through strength looks like. That demonstration of what your power is, sometimes that's all the control that you need.
As Secretary Rubio stated just yesterday, this is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States. You can't turn Venezuela into the operating hub for Iran, for Hezbollah, for gangs, for Cuban intelligence agents, and other malign actors that control that country. You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders, and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela. Colleagues, the United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation facilitated by the U.S. military against two indicted fugitives of American justice, narco-terrorist Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. Colleagues, Nicolas Maduro is responsible for attacks on the people of the United States, for destabilizing the Western Hemisphere, and illegitimately repressing the people of Venezuela. As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation in furtherance of lawful indictments that have existed for decades. The United States arrested a narco-trafficker who is now going to stand trial in the United States in accordance with the rule of law for the crimes he's committed against our people for 15 years. A similar action was taken in 1989 against Manuel Noriega.
On January the 3rd, the United States blatantly launched large-scale military strikes against Venezuela, forcibly seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and took them out of the country. It claimed that it will run Venezuela and even didn't rule out launching a second round of military operations on an even larger scale. China is deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S. For some time now, the international community has repeatedly expressed grave concern over the U.S. sanctions, blockade, and threats of force against Venezuela. The Council convened two emergency meetings, during which Secretary General Guterres, many Council members, and countries in the region and beyond unanimously called for abiding by the UN Charter and the international law, maintaining calm and restraint, resolving disputes peacefully, de-escalating tensions, and safeguarding regional stability. However, as a permanent member of the Council, The U.S. has disregarded the grave concerns of the international community, wantonly trampled upon Venezuela's sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, and seriously violated the principles of sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, peaceful settlement of international disputes, and the prohibition of the use of force in international relations. These principles constitute the fundamental tenets of the UN Charter and form the cornerstone of maintaining international peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean, and indeed internationally. China firmly opposes this, and the international community has also expressed widespread grave concern and strong condemnation. We urge the U.S. to heed the overwhelming voice of the international community, abide by international law and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, cease infringing upon the sovereignty and security of other countries, stop toppling the government of Venezuela, and return to the path of political solutions through dialogue and negotiations. We call on the U.S. to ensure the personal safety of President Maduro and his wife and to release them at once. We support the Council in fulfilling its primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and we support all efforts by the UN Secretary General, regional countries, and organizations that contribute to promoting dialogue and de-escalating the situation. President, the lessons of history are a stark warning. Military means are not the solution to problems, and the indiscriminate use of force will only lead to greater crisis.
Denmark recalls the foundational principle of international law that forbids states from threatening or using force against another state's territorial integrity and political independence. This imperative is enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Members of the UN Security Council have a special responsibility to uphold these principles. The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere,
depending upon the political landscape. Today, we are reaping the consequences of their recklessness and selectivity in matters related to respect for the norms of international law, which were linked to the so-called rules-based world order. Here is your rules-based world order in all of its glory, which is of aggression due to a fear of angering the American global gendarme, which is attempting to once again rear its head. We are particularly appalled by the unparalleled cynicism with which Washington did not even attempt to conceal the true aims of its criminal operation, namely the establishment of unbridled control over Venezuela's natural resources and the assertion of their hegemonical ambitions in Latin America. In this way, Washington is generating, there is no and can be no justification for the crimes cynically perpetrated by the United States in Caracas. We firmly condemn the U.S. act of armed aggression against Venezuela in breach of all international legal norms. In connection with the confirmed reports about the presence of the abducted president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his spouse in the United States, today, as we are aware, they are in New York. We call upon, corrects the speaker, the U.S. leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of an independent state and his spouse. Any problems existing or conflict between the United States and Venezuela need to be resolved through dialogue. And this is precisely what is enshrined in the UN Charter, for purposes and the principles of which a number of states in recent years have begun to apply selectively.
I remain deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the 3 January military action. The Charter enshrines the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The maintenance of international peace and security depends on the continued commitment of all member states to adhere to all the provisions of the Charter. Mr. President, Venezuela has experienced decades of internal instability and social and economic turmoil. Democracy has been undermined. Millions of its people have fled the country. The situation is critical, but it is still possible to prevent a wider and more destructive conflagration. I call on all Venezuelan actors to engage in an inclusive, democratic dialogue in which all sectors of society can determine their future. This entails the full respect of human rights, the rule of law, and the sovereign will of the Venezuelan people. I also urge Venezuela's neighbors and the international community more broadly to act in a spirit of solidarity and in adherence to the principles, laws, and rules erected to promote peaceful coexistence. I welcome and am ready to support all efforts aimed at assisting Venezuelans in finding a peaceful way forward. Mr. President, Excellencies, in situations as confused as complex as the one we now face, it is important to stick to principles. Respect for the UN Charter and all other applicable legal frameworks to safeguard peace and security. Respect for the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states. The prohibition of the threat or use of force. The power of the law must prevail. International law contains tools to address issues such as illicit traffic in narcotics, disputes about resources, and human rights concerns. This is the route we need to
go bonkers.
Is the Cuban government the Trump administration's next target, Mr. Secretary? Very quickly.
Well, the Cuban government is a huge problem. Yeah, the Cuban government is a huge problem. First of all,
so is that a yes?
Cuba, but I don't think people fully appreciate. I think they're in a lot of trouble, yes. I'm not going to talk to you about what our future steps are going to be and our policies are going to be right now in this regard, but I don't think it's any mystery that we are not big fans of the Cuban regime, who, by the way, are the ones that were propping up Maduro. His entire, internal security force, his internal security apparatus is entirely controlled by Cubans. One of the untold stories here is how, in essence, you talk about colonization, because I think you said Dulce Rodriguez mentioned that. The ones who have sort of colonized, at least inside the regime, are Cubans. It was Cubans that guarded Maduro. He was not guarded by Venezuelan bodyguards. Right. He had Cuban bodyguards. In terms of their internal intelligence, who spies on who inside to make sure there are no traitors, those are all Cubans.
All right. Secretary
Maria, I think the more analysis and the more I hear those that have legitimate opinion about what happened, and if you just take kind of what Secretary Hegseth said kind of at face value, this is strictly a law enforcement type of operation with support from the U.S. military. They can debate all they want the Monroe Doctrine, which I would say, I think one of the things that's been missing in the discussion is that President Roosevelt revisited this, Teddy Roosevelt, and, made it very clear that this is about each hemisphere as well globally, and our ability to make sure that countries that are located in our backyard are not a threat to the states, and that's why I think they can debate this all day in the U.S. Senate, which they're known for, but at the end of the day, it was a law enforcement action.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting to see the priorities of the Democrats right now and how they get so upset over everything President Trump does. Meanwhile, he's focusing on such enormous things, drugs coming into the country, securing our borders. It's quite a difference in terms of what you're looking at, in terms of priorities of the Democrats. Congress returning to Washington today to face a tight legislative calendar.
It's a great day, quite frankly, Maria. You talk about the extraction of Maduro. Actually, it was the extradition of a illegitimate leader, someone who stole an election, was not the legitimate president of Venezuela. And it's amazing that the Trump administration has the courage, because of their leader. Donald Trump is the president of peace, and what he's doing is stabilizing the region. Americans are safer today. The region is safer today, the Western Hemisphere, because of the action that the Trump administration took the other night.
I'm glad the president didn't just take Maduro and walk away. I'm glad that he is committed. He is committed to freedom and democracy in Venezuela. Now, I've talked to Marco Rubio about it. I've talked to the president about it. They're committed to freedom and liberty. Now, I can't tell you how they're going to get there, but I believe we're going to get there.
You would condemn Trump going into Greenland, just to be clear.
Well, let me be really clear about Greenland. The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is a close European ally, a close NATO ally, and the future, therefore, has to be for Greenland, for the Kingdom of Denmark, and only for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And we're absolutely clear about that.
The Danish Prime Minister's told Trump to stop the threats about Greenland. Do you agree with her?
Well, I'd stand with her.
Okay.
And she's right about the future of Greenland.
Okay.
It is time now for Money Power Politics. In an exclusive interview with NBC News, President Trump says, and I want you to stop doom scrolling, just really pay attention for a second. He says the United States government could reimburse U.S. oil companies that rebuild Venezuelan infrastructure. The president did not say how much money that could cost, but I'm going to tell you, it's a lot. He believes that the oil industry could get operations, quote, up and running in fewer than 18 months. Oil experts would tell you a decade. So I just want to level set for a moment about exactly what's happening here. Nicolas Maduro is obviously no friend to the United States. But by sending our troops to Venezuela to overthrow him, Trump may have violated international law, sidestepping Congress, and threatened the world order. And while Maduro is locked up here in New York, his regime is still largely in place, and they will be as long as their oil reserves are open to U.S. companies. We do not know whether U.S. oil companies actually want to invest big in Venezuela again. Remember, that oil is not American oil. It is Venezuela's. Many years ago, U.S. oil companies made a bunch of very risky investments in Venezuela, and they got burned badly by Maduro's predecessor, who basically kicked him out. That history is still fresh in executives' minds. It is why Trump is dangling the carrot of big reimbursements if they buy into his plan. But for fact's sake, as I said, it could take a decade and billions of dollars for U.S. oil companies to rebuild infrastructure and get that oil pumping on Russian and Chinese oil fields, no less. And Trump, don't forget, he's leaving office in less than 3 years.
Previous presidents told us to go to war over WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, that did not exist. Now it's the same playbook, except we're told that drugs are the WMDs. This is about oil and regime change. Mr. Speaker, James Madison warned us that in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war and peace to the legislature and not the executive. Madison called it the crown jewel of Congress. The framers understood a simple truth. To the extent that war-making power devolves to one person, liberty dissolves. If the president believes military action against Venezuela is justified and needed, he should make the case and Congress should vote before American lives and treasure are spent on regime change in South America. Let's be honest about likely outcomes. Do we truly believe that Nicolas Maduro will be replaced by a modern-day George Washington? How did that work out? In Cuba, Libya, Iraq, or Syria, previous presidents told us to go to war over WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, that did not exist. Now it's the same playbook, except we're told that drugs are the WMDs. If it were about drugs, we'd bomb Mexico or China or Colombia, and the president would not have pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez. This is about oil and regime change. And when it comes to regime change, we've already been down this road with Venezuela with nothing to show for it. In 2019, we recognized Juan Guaido. We seized their embassy here in D.C. We were told that regime change was imminent. Years later, Maduro remains in power. Today, we're told to place our hopes in other exiled figures. Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado. I wish them well, I do. But Congress should not express moral sympathy in the form of a blank check for military escalation and American lives. And let's take a moment to acknowledge the contradiction at the heart of this policy. This administration tells us that the Maduro regime is made up of narco-terrorists, and by escalating toward war, we would predictably create countless refugees. At the same time, this administration has moved to end temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans and deports them back to the very regime it condemns. So which is it? Are we prepared to receive swarms of the 25 million Venezuelans who will likely become refugees and billions in American treasure that will be used to destroy and inevitably rebuild that nation? Do we want a miniature Afghanistan in the Western Hemisphere? If that cost is acceptable to this Congress, then we should vote on it as a voice of the people and in accordance with our Constitution. And yet today, here we aren't even voting on whether to declare war or authorize the use of military force. All we're voting on is a war powers resolution that strengthens the fabric of our republic by reasserting the plain and simple language in the Constitution that Congress must decide questions of war. I urge support for this resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman, time had expired.